All right, so let's take a look at where we left off last time. You can see I move my mouse up or down, the camera moves. If I push the W key, I can sort of move around. I can collect these little orbs. I also have this other character here, which when I get a little bit too close to my non-playable character, it'll chase me. And we could always adjust these values so that it detects me a little bit as you know, get a bit closer than this. So now you can see it was following me. So we've made public variables for all this stuff, and as well as like me being able to run away. And then we have these health pickups. But wouldn't it be interesting if I could? Come on. There we go. Just double checking that those work. If I can left click and if I can actually shoot or blast those enemies there. So like this little NPC walking around. So let's take a look at how to do that. Let's go ahead and stop by pressing the play button at the top. Now, because we're going to be attaching this script to our player, inside the player folder here, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create another C# script. And I'm going to just name this one projectile controller. Let's double click it and open it in Visual Studio. All right, so at the top here, let's go ahead and create a public game object called projectile prefab. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll return to Unity, and we'll make the projectile that's going to fire out. Now, we're going to add a little bit of a different way of shooting than previous tutorials. In this one, we're going to have actually like a fire rate. So like you can't just keep mashing the button to shoot. It'll sort of be like this particular energy weapon has to recharge. So let's return to Unity now and create that projectile. All right, what we'll do in a future tutorial is we'll actually go in and create a particle effect like an energy weapon. But for now, we're doing a lot of representational art. So let's go ahead and just right click in here and then create another 3D object. And we're going to name this one projectile. So I'll probably make a sphere for now and I'll leave it pretty big. And let's just rename this to projectile. And what we'll do is we'll add a rigid body component. And in our prefabs folder here, I'm going to grab and just drop that in there. Now, if I press play right now, let's see, we want to make sure that we can sort of see it fall. You can see it has the rigid body physics on it. Let's go ahead and stop that. You could also hit Control P to stop playing. I can also delete this from the scene for now. So with our player selected, let's go ahead and drag that projectile controller script on there and on that public variable that we just created. Let's grab our projectile from here and drop it inside of there. Now let's save this and return to Visual Studio and start scripting some of the logic that's going to make this fire. All right, so I created some code earlier. So let's paste this in here. And let's just review this. So this is essentially the speed in which I want the projectile to move. So that's going to be what's adding force to that rigid body. We'll do some math. We'll probably create our own function that just handles shooting. Before, we would do everything in update. And so I sort of want to start teaching you a little bit better programming practices as we go along. It's helpful to do everything in update when you're first learning so you could learn a little bit about logic and all that good stuff. Fire rate is going to be in seconds, as you could see here. So if I left click, how much time do I want to be able to fire off? And then in between shots, there's this next fire time. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of calculating where I could say, okay, well, right now it's set to 0, but because, let's make this public actually. And that way we can allow our game designer, or if you are the game designer, to edit it. So you can say, oh, well, the next fire time is 3 seconds or whatever. I generally set these to 0 for the most part because if I don't want them to have any sort of, I want to be able to adjust the values based how it is in the editor. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete the start method here. And inside of update, I am going to add a little bit of logic. So let's drop this if statement in here. Now, what this does is, and we're going to be creating this fire projectile method, so don't worry too much about the error here. But what we're doing is if we're checking if our left mouse button, and if you remember from the last tutorial, you can go to Edit Project Settings and then look in the Input Manager, and you'll find this Fire 1 in there, and it's mapped to the left mouse button. If the button that we're pushing and the time.time, so this is measuring the clock time of the computer, is greater than, which it is now at 0, than the next fire time, then we'll be able to do what's inside of here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be resetting the next fire time here to whatever our current time is, plus 1 divided by fire rate. So really all this is doing is it's taking fire rate, which is set to 1, and it's, if you divide 1 by 1, you get 1. If you change this to fire rate to 5, 1 divided by 5, 5. So you might be wondering, well, why don't you just, why are you dividing 1 by 5? I'm sorry, the other way around. Why are you dividing 1 by whatever the fire rate is? The reason for that is that fractional time helps us to see or to adjust how much time has passed based on that. So it sort of slows everything down. So underneath update here, let's go ahead and create that fire projectile method. I'm going to pause the video and go ahead and type that out. All right, so we made a little bit of space and we went ahead and I pasted this in here. So what's happening here? We are creating a new variable that's called projectile instance. And the reason why you do this, and as I mentioned in previous tutorials, but it's always good to, especially with this complex stuff, re-reference it. We're creating a instance or a copy of that sphere, that the projectile sphere that we created earlier. And then the instantiate method here is what actually spawns it in the world. So as we're pressing the left mouse button and the time is being set, every time I press it, it's going to ask, well, what do you want to instantiate? It's going to be that sphere. Well, where do you want to instantiate it? Well, I want it to be at the transform position. Now, the issue with this script is it's currently set to the player's body, and so it's going to be spawned from the center of the character. So what we might want to do is actually, and I didn't think about this at first, but we'll create an empty game object like we did in previous tutorials, and we'll just place that in front of our character. And the rotation, when we set it to transform rotation, it's really set to the whatever rotation angle the object that the script is attached to is. And then so this is what instantiates it to the scene. But as it's instantiating, we're saving it into this variable projectile instance. Now that's important because as it goes out into the world, whatever gets shot out, it stores it in this variable. And this projectile instance here is what we can do with that is we can access different parts of the projectile, which is the sphere. And so one of those is we can grab the rigid body component from that object that spawned, and then we can add some velocity to send it forward. And that's what this does. But the speed or how much emphasis we want is going to be set by this projectile speed that we created earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And let's go back to Unity and let's add that empty game object. And then we'll reattach this script. So we're going to be doing a little bit of removing and adding scripts back in Unity. All right, here we are back in Unity. And here's my player. Now, we have the sphere object here, which is the nose of our player. But what I'd like to do is right-click here and then just create an empty game object. And then what we can name this to is sort of like projectile. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good name. Spawner or something. Sometimes they call them muzzle tips, but we don't really have this isn't a shooting game. Then I'm going to go to player here, and I'm actually going to right-click on this, and I'm going to copy this component, and I'm going to remove this component. So you can do that, or you can press the delete key. And then I'm going to go back to my projectile spawner here. I'm going to right-click on the transform up here, and I'm going to paste component as new, and you could see it remembered my projectile. And then here's the next fire time. So let's say we leave it at 0. Let's see how that looks. And actually, let's set our projectile to the front of our character. I'm thinking it might shoot off at the z-axis, but let's see what happens. Yeah, you can see it's firing off on the z. So I'm going to hit Control P to stop that. And what we could do is this projectile spawner, if I zero this out, it should set it to the same axis as the player. And I'm going to position it right off to the side here. Now, the fire rate was pretty low. So a couple things that you want to think about. With your projectile here, if you want it to just fire or go straight, you can actually remove gravity. I kind of like the idea of it sort of falling to the floor, like you're firing an energy blaster, it has weight. Because when we go to make the projectile, or the particle rather, it might add some interest. So I'm going to left click here, and as I'm walking around, I'm going to fire. And you can see we've got a little bit of wait time. You can increase that wait time depending on how you want. And also that sphere is sort of affecting, let's see. Yeah, it's rotating our character. So let's adjust the rigid body that's on our player here. So if we freeze the rotation on Y, let's see if that moves our character. I'm going to hit spacebar. You can see we're jumping, we're firing, and all these values, as you know, can be adjusted. So as we're moving around, we're firing. Might be cool to give that projectile a little bit better speed. So let's take this up to 50 and let's see how far that sends it. Yeah, look at that. Really blasted around our level. Something else that might be cool is if we go in and add the destroy time. If you recall, you can have it destroy so our scene isn't loaded with these spheres. So let's return to Visual Studio and add that code. All right, so here we are back in Visual Studio. Let's go ahead and just type destroy. And then it has projectile instance, which is referencing this instance. What this would do is destroy it almost immediately when it spawns. Let's say we want to remove it after 3 seconds. So let's save that. And let's return to Unity and see how that looks. All right, here we are back in Unity. Let's play our game. I'm going to get to a place where I have kind of like a wall here. So I'm just going to shoot a bunch of these so that we could see them hopefully delete. Around our level. Come on, where are we? There's one. Okay, let's follow it. Oh, yeah, so there we go. You see it deleted after 3 seconds. What we'll do in the next video is we'll add some sound so that when it fires, we get maybe like a blasting sound, a particle sound.